Welcome back to DMV Sports Zone.
Chased down by Beal in the corner for three, gets fouled and hits.
Welcome to DC.
Well, they timed him out.
You know we're down at the USA Cup. You're taking us lightly, I'm taking us lightly. Now you don't act, but we will be right back. Well, we gon' be right here, we gon' be right here. We ain't going nowhere. Welcome to DC. DC, the home of Chuck Brown. Oh, you don't know the sound? Well, let me break it down.
What's good, DMV Sports Zone? This is Noah in with week 2 of the Washington Capitals and Washington Wizards Fantasy Sports Breakdown. Before I get started, I'm really happy to announce that our private beta was successfully launched with Sport AI. So if you want more fantasy sports analytics information, the sign-up link is in the bio. What I want to talk about today is, week 1 predictions went really well. A lot of the storylines that we want to continue to see, the Vanacek-Samsonov goaltending battle, the new guys, all of them have a lot of intriguing storylines. However, there's some other players like TJ Oshie that I want to mention. In terms of the Wizards, wow. Kyle Kuzma exceeded expectations. Dinwiddie's doing really well. We're looking like we might have some sleepers on our team. But I want to calm the hype down and see who's going to last and who won't. Without further ado, let's get started with the Capitals. So the Washington Capitals off to a great start. As expected, we were, for the many years now, one of the best teams in the Metropolitan in the former Eastern Conference. Ovechkin off to a great start. But the main storyline that we wanted to follow was Vitek Vanacek versus Ilya Samsonov. So interestingly enough, they split both their starts. They've had around an even amount of starts after Vanacek started the season, looking like the undisputed number 1, including last night in a 7-5 win over the Ottawa Senators. Samsonov has the better record on paper, but his goaltending stats aren't that promising. 88% save percentage, over 3 goals a game. So what does that mean for the Washington Capitals goalie situation? As I suggested last week, I really wanted to do a duo style, have both Vanacek and Samsonov on your roster so that you could pick up the wins. And that's the reality. Samsonov, Vanacek, they're still very young goaltenders. They may be inconsistent, but with a good Capitals team, they can find ways to win games. I mean, Samsonov gave up 5 goals and they still won, thanks to 7 goals from the Washington Capitals. So that's the situation still to monitor. And now I really double down on that strategy. Get Samsonov and Vanacek, because wins will be more common than losses for the Washington Capitals this season. So you can benefit from the win stat, because that's very valued in fantasy hockey. The other players I want to mention, outside of what I mentioned before, is those depth players. Our depth has really stepped up in scoring, especially from the blue line. Tom Wilson, TJ Oshie had a hat trick. They're solid players. They might still be on waiver wire. At this point, you definitely got to pick them up. They're good role players. Nothing more. But I want to talk about the blue line. So obviously everybody knows about John Carlson. He's had a relatively slow start, but there is no reason not to continue to trust him as your number 1 D in fantasy. However, what about Dmitry Orlov? And what about Nick Jensen? Nick Jensen's actually off to a really good start, as well as Fervary and some of the other players. But Orlov and Jensen are 2 players that I would really suggest to target. They're getting the minutes per game. They're getting the power play minutes. They're getting the penalty kill minutes. They're getting the regular time minutes, meaning that there's a higher chance for them to really stay consistent throughout the season. Jensen's really trusted on that second unit. I would really pick him up on fantasy if he's not already been picked up, as well as Dmitry Orlov. Both those players are now definitely on 12 to 14 team leagues, must pickups. For 8 to 10 team leagues, either a watch list, or if you have space, because some of the injuries have happened, especially on the Pittsburgh Penguins side earlier this season, I'll pick them up. And yeah, I was pretty quick with the Capitals, but Capitals amongst all the DC teams are the smoothest sailing. Those players that I mentioned will be guys that you're going to hold on for throughout the season. But what about the Wizards? So, the Wizards have surprised everybody. They've come out swinging. They've had some big games, and a lot of our new players are playing extremely well. Montrezl Harrell, Spencer Dinwiddie, all these guys are playing really well. And at this point, I don't really think anybody doesn't have them on their roster, because most of them were drafted already. So let's talk about guys that may have been on the later end of the draft or maybe still on the waiver wire, Kyle Kuzma is a must pick up fantasy player. Rebounding, efficient scoring, good other defensive stats. He's played really well to start this season, and it looks like the Wizards are really going to rely on him as he's still really young as a player, and they want to see what they have with him. Of course, what does it mean when Rui Hachimura comes back? If anything, it's a 1A, 1B situation. Very similar with how people are kind of playing the PJ Washington, Mason Plumlee situation in Charlotte. They're going to probably start players based off a matchup, but there's still more than enough minutes to go around, as Bertans would suffer from the arrival of Rui Hachimura, not Kuzma. So both those players will maintain relatively decent fantasy counting stats throughout the season. We'll see next week, but he's going to have a strong week. Kuzma's going to especially have a strong week this week with Rui Hachimura not expected to return. What about any of the additional players? Daniel Gafford, again, I talked about him last week. At this point, if you don't have him on your roster, either you have a center limit or you are in a 5-team league, because Gafford is going to be the fantasy breakout star this year. Already averaging well over a block a game, almost 10 points, almost 8 rebounds. He's a consistent double-double threat with blocks and scores efficiently. A big energy guy and one of the few true centers on the team with Harrell and Bryant. Bryant's going to come back in December. Both of them undersized, better served as a undersized small ball center or as a power forward. Daniel Gafford is the center to pick up on waiver wires, not just for the Wizards, but throughout the league. So if Gafford is still on your waiver wire and you don't have a center limit, pick him up. Him and Kuzma are going to be those fantasy breakout guys. Dinwiddie, Harrell going to be great as well, but I really doubt that they're still on waivers. Hachimura is expected to come back within the next 2 weeks, so I know a lot of people still have him on waivers. If you have an injury slot, I would really suggest picking him up. He will be a sleeper as well. Of course, you got to monitor the Kuzma-Hachimura situation, of course, but both players offer similar counting stats in terms of consistent points per game, rebounding, but in Hachimura's advantage, he is becoming a better defensive player. He may get more steals, but I think Kuzma will remain the more consistent, higher floor player, but Hachimura has the higher ceiling. It's going to be really interesting to see how they both play out on a Wizards team that now is absolutely blessed with tons of front court depth, which we really struggled with before. In terms of the guards, obviously Dinwiddie, Neto, good energy player. Remain to see, but I really doubt unless you're in a categories league that's very deep. He's not worth picking up at this time. Still a great energy player, and in real life is a great player for the Wizards. But in terms of the guard situation, we already have our established players like Beal and Dinwiddie. So the front court is where you want to watch, because Hachimura, Kuzma, Gafford, those 3 players are only owned in an average of around 60% of the ESPN fantasy leagues as well as other platforms, with Hachimura and Kuzma being well into the 20 percentile right now. So if they're still on waivers, I would pick them up immediately. Kuzma, the immediate benefactor, long term. Hachimura coming back from being out will be a great addition as well. So I know this is a pretty quick summary, but man, I'm really excited for the Wizards, really excited for the Capitals. A lot of fantasy sleepers and a lot of good situations to play on. The goaltending battle for the Capitals, and then the forward battle for the Wizards. A good situation to be in as a Washington fan and as a fantasy sports player, so you can seek to benefit from the situation. Again, this is Noah from DAV Sports Zone, and if you want to know more about where I get my fantasy sports analytics data and to be part of the new private beta that's going to be public November 5th, more information on Sport AI in the bio. And again, I hope you have a great day.